So next, we're going to turn to Lev Kushner to present. And Lev is the founding partner of the Department of Here. He's an urbanist and futurist, and he joins us from San Francisco. So Lev has had to get up really early in the morning. So thank you very much, Lev, for joining us. So tell us, what does the future look like from where you are?
All right. Thank you guys so much for having me here. It's the beginning of a foggy day here in San Francisco. And so I'm going to jump right in because there's not a lot of time. I'm going to walk through two different, I think, like perspectives on the way you could approach this question. And then at the end, because you guys demand it, I'm going to come up with some predictions that will all be wrong. But the idea of showing my approach is that at least maybe I'll sound intelligent before you get to the predictions where they'll all be wrong. So the first thing I want to talk about here, there we go, is I think right now, and I think for the next few decades, certainly, we're going to be going through a crisis of convenience versus community. So right now you can get just about anything in the world delivered to your couch. You can get your food, you can get your products, you can get everything. You can even spend time online chatting with people. And what that does in the short term is that leads to, peak laziness. Is everybody seeing my screen? Can I get a thumbs up from you, Peter? Is there a lag for you? Okay.
No, we're seeing a slight lag, transatlantic cable, but we can see it clearly.
All right, good. So it leads to peak laziness. And the issue there really is that convenience leads to loneliness. If you spend all your days sitting on your couch, then you're not going to go out and meet people. But it's really convenient because you get everything delivered right to you. And another way to say this, of course, is that other people are really inconvenient, which, I firmly believe, but not just because of the pandemic, right? It's other people, they do all these things, right? You go out in the world and you see all this stuff. I do think, though, that as we start to transition more towards a digital realm, the value of in-person community is going to sustain itself. People are going to want to meet with their friends. We still have, even though we like to think we're on our way into a digital existence, we still have bodies. We still like to be around other people. We are not yet in the matrix, right? All those other people you run into in the world, if you choose not to have goods delivered, your whole life delivered to your couches, they expose you to ideas, they expose you to all sorts of crazy sights, and they expose you also to some smells, which is not so pleasant. But all in all, let's see if I can get this to catch up. The adjacency externality is durable. I think that as we go forward in cities next 40 years, people are really going to want to continue to be near each other. And the question, what that means for our conversation today is, where will that community live? Where will that inconvenience live? Because they really are one and the same. And I think there's a few ideas. One is, I think with an increased proliferation of remote work, you're going to see a lot more community live in the traditional suburbs where people are going to be working from home. They're going to be working from cafes. They're going to be walking their kids to school, and they're going to be meeting their neighbors in a way that they haven't really been in today's commute heavy environment. I think even though I'm old and I find Slack pretty much annoying, I know that young folk are on Twitch, they're streaming their video games, and they're forging really powerful communities. So I think some of it is going to remain online, and there is going to be a lot of communicating online and a lot of culture that grows in that space. The question really for us, though, is what is the next water cooler? What are the physiological needs of your body that are going to make you go places where you run into other people? So eating, so drinking, going to the bathroom, stretching your legs, getting a bit of sunshine, all of those things are going to become increasingly important as we spend more of our time transitioning to a digital environment. The other approach that you could make on this is infrastructure versus culture. So at Department of Here, we talk a lot about the permanent temporary, which is this term that we made up that talks about the phase of life, the phase of culture that we're in now, where the churn of change is constant, and that is the defining characteristic of this era. And I think for multiple decades to come, is that it's going to be changing so fast, whether that's from climate change or technological innovation or whatever, this feeling is exacerbated by the fact that the physical world that we live in is changing really slowly. It's, as a matter of fact, in some ways, it's slowing down. Real estate and infrastructure projects, especially here in America, they take a really long time to complete. So you can have like a 15-year real estate project during which there are 3 cultural revolutions with the cultural attendant, cultures that spring up around that technology. So it creates this really bizarre feeling. And I use this obviously highly scientific graph to show that you've got, the infrastructure is just plodding along and, growing slowly and steadily while technology and culture change is taking off. And that red gap between the two, that's the permanent temporary. That's the period where we are that makes you feel, like this, where you've got 1 foot on the boat and 1 foot on the dock, and the boat is slowly moving away from the dock as you can feel your legs spreading, and it's all going to go south pretty quickly. So what does that mean for how we are going to transform our cities? It's going to be a lot of repurposing of buildings, right? There's going to be a lot of, we just can't tear buildings down and spring them up to keep pace with our technological and cultural change. So there's going to be a lot of creativity, and I think that's going to put a lot of pressure on architectures to come up with new ways to take existing facilities and repurpose them. I think it's going to require a lot more flexibility. This is an image from an article just this week that was in Bloomberg by David Rockwell, who's a very well-known retail architect in New York City. And he wrote an article about how restaurants are going to have to become multi-purpose centers in order to survive, right? They're going to be, during the day, there'll be classes, there'll be agricultural indoor grow centers, there'll be little supermarkets. And then maybe at night, they shift over to what we think of as standard restaurant function. But creating those physical spaces that are highly flexible is really going to be the name of the game going forward. And the issue here is the highly fluid environments that we're going to be creating, that's going to in turn really raise the value of programming. And I think that the definition of architecture is going to morph to not just be the physical spaces, but the way that you program the spaces. Because the way that you activate and encourage people to bump into each other or different activities interact is going to stimulate innovation. And I don't even necessarily just mean the business innovation. I mean social innovation. I mean getting out and running into people. So designing spaces where people bump up against each other in a healthy and interesting way is going to be really important with what we do with our spaces. In America, we have, I'm assuming they have these in the UK as well. The trend in our park design is to have these multi-use fields. I don't know if you can see this image. I apologize, it's lagging. But what they do here is you walk up onto the field, and there'll be like 3 or 4 different colored lines all over the field, right? And at first, it's really hugely disorienting. But once you walk on the field, you're like, okay, I'm playing soccer, football, sorry. I'm going to be playing soccer, and I just have to pay attention to white lines. And all the other kind of information that's overlaid on the field bleeds away as you realize you don't have to pay attention to yellow and purple and red and all these other markings. I think that toolkit is going to be super important in the future, and that we're going to have to be thinking very, very clearly about how to do spatial demarcation. So now I'm going to segue into predictions, which, as the famous quote goes, they're very difficult, especially when they're about the future. And so the first thing I want to say is that not all cities are the same, right? The question of how are cities going to be functioning in the future is a really good one, but I think it's really important to realize that they're going to be really different across the board. The star cities are going to maintain their cachet. I think as we segue into more remote work, what it's going to do is increase the geographic catchment area of a city. You can live farther and farther from a New York or a London and still consider yourself centered and anchored in London. And because of that, I think second and third tier cities are going to struggle. If the real reason is to be near the big city, there's much less of a call to be near a smaller city. They get gobbled up geographically. And I think what that means for those second and third tier cities is that urban differentiation, the way they express themselves, their values, through their policies, through their design, through their culture is going to be much, much more important. You can no longer, in California, for example, in San Francisco, there's a bunch of smaller cities, an hour, 2 hours from San Francisco, that are constantly calling themselves San Francisco, but cheaper. It's a terrible marketing line. Nobody should ever use that. But I think that era is really going to be gone. You can't just be San Francisco, but cheaper, because you can now live 3 hours from San Francisco and still commute into San Francisco. But getting a little bit more specific, as I said above, I think ways to delineate space are going to become really important. I think VRQs are going to be built into the world now. People are, already on their iPhones and on their Apple Watch. And I think there is going to be some form of Google Glass, as annoying as it looks, and that people are going to, the physical architecture of cities is going to include the VRQs that they see through their headset or whatever. And that's going to be a very important way in which we delineate space, because as you're walking around the city, people are split screening, right? They're talking to their spouse, they're holding their kid's hand, they're reading a newspaper article, and they're running into a colleague. They have to be 5 different people at once, and the architecture has to support that. Both the physical and the digital infrastructure have to support that, and they have to be integrated with each other in a way that they currently are not at all. This always makes me think of Wooners. When I was in city planning school, long time ago, we spent a lot of time talking about the multi-use streets in the Netherlands, about how they don't separate bicycles from pedestrians from cars. They just, from building face to building face, there's an open space, and it creates this very dynamic space. And I think there's going to be a lot of that going forward, not just in streets, in lobby level, and even in the office level above. I think the spaces are just going to have to be much more flexible, and that if we get ourselves mentally ready to design those spaces, it asks us a lot of questions as designers and encourages us to, as I said, be program heavy. Now getting into mixed uses, I think that there's going to be a whole new suite of mixed uses in city centers going forward. This is a picture. Prologis is an international logistics company headquartered here in San Francisco. And while it's already, I think, common in Europe and Japan, in America, they're now shifting towards multi-level distribution centers. So, I have a project in San Francisco where next door they're building a four-level warehouse. And I think that you're going to see the distribution use move closer and closer to the city center as companies try to achieve instantaneous delivery of their goods to satisfy our laziness. And I think you'll see weird splits. I think you're going to see office distribution. Some of the office space that gets vacant, that becomes vacant because of remote work, may become small distribution hubs. There may be hotel office distribution. Another one, and this is kind of a weird one, is religious residential mixed use. I think you're going to see religious institutions forsake their historic, iconic architecture in order to be closer to their people. So in America, religious institutions, through a quirk of the law, get air rights that they can share, and they have these large old buildings that they can no longer maintain, too big for their flock, and so they're selling their air rights in their land and folding into residential towers where they have a separate entrance. But I think it's going to create that sense of community that people really want. So if you're Christian and your church has an apartment tower above its church, I think you're going to see a lot of interest in that. As that permanent temporary is constantly shifting, people are going to be seeking rooted communal environments much more strongly. Another one, a little tongue in cheek, is you're going to see office above, nightclub below, a lot more shift change type of development, where when certain people leave, other people come in, or some people spend a really long day at the office and then just go blow off some steam. Also, as Judith referenced, brick and mortar retail is really struggling. Here in America, the zoning requires in a lot of places that you have retail on the ground floor to enliven the streetscape. And the question we have to ask is, if brick and mortar retail is going to struggle, what are we going to put on the ground floor to keep that streetscape lively? We can no longer bank on stores just filling all that space. I think this one will take a while to become true, but I do think that the kind of zoning categories that we traditionally use here in America are going to go by the wayside. and we're going to have to start thinking in new ways about how to change things up. And that brings me to this last one, which is that I think the term mixed use is just it's at the end of its usable lifespan anyway. I think the idea that it's just a mixing of uses is what makes a city so special is short-sighted. I think, for example, one way is I think you're going to see mixed age developments where you have a preschool and you have a senior living facility and you have a college facility all in the same building or all in the same development. And that mixing users from different points in their lives creates a much more substantial sense of community, and that's going to become really valuable to real estate developers as they try to satisfy those urges. So those are all my thoughts. Definitely not going to try to pronounce that. Hopefully it says thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure to be here.
Lev, thank you so much. I really like the kind of convenience versus community dichotomy and that disconnect between rapid technological change and slow infrastructure change. So yeah, really, really provocative and interesting thoughts. So thank you for that.